Hi, thanks for clicking on the Container Security and DevOps, Supply Chain Security and Runtime Security as Code video, and welcome to SUSECON 2022. My name is Tracy Walker. I am a Senior Solutions Engineer for SUSE NewVector, and in this video we're going to talk about how NewVector's Container Security Platform helps those environments that are DevOps-y, or that you've implemented DevOps. What is DevOps? Well, DevOps is basically, you can read the definition right there on the screen, right? But when I talk about DevOps, what I'm really talking about is being able to shift something left. The earlier that you can do something in the software development lifecycle, usually the better it is toward velocity, being able to deliver quality software in as short a time and for the least expense possible. How does NewVector Container Security Platform help in these endeavors? Well, first let's talk a little bit about what NewVector does. So NewVector is going to help with all of your supply chain security, which includes vulnerability scanning, compliance scanning, doing these earlier in software development, in the development organization, numerous times throughout the supply chain development lifecycle. So if you're kind of a DevOps shop and you have a culture of automating your build pipelines and things like that, this will help automate your scanning and security setting checks on those images in those pipelines. We also implement emission control in Kubernetes and Rancher. That emission controller is what is preventing bad images or images that violate certain rules that you have set forth. You can prevent those images from running in those environments. On the runtime side of NewVector, the runtime scanning is scanning for vulnerabilities and compliance checks, but it's doing it in the running environment itself. So that's why we kind of count it in the runtime side. It's really the end of the pipeline, if you want to think of it that way. The threat-based controls are referring to the network inspection that NewVector does. It's validating layer 7 traffic. By validating, we are making sure that the layer 7 protocol is well formed. If it isn't, and we match a particular threat signature in that malformed protocol, we can detect those threats. So that's how our threat-based controls, because that is not ever a complete list of every possible threat that's out there, we have zero trust controls. And that's where we're protecting the runtime environment from a network process and file access point, all of the behaviors of an application that we have created security rules for. That creates zero trust because that's a complete list. We're capturing every behavior at a process network level. We are then enforcing that nothing except those behaviors are allowed. That's zero trust, or alerting if we're in monitor mode. So that zero trust control is one of the areas we can also focus on the DevOps side. So let's talk a little bit about the capabilities within NewVector that are related to DevOps. The top four, you can see with the image scanning, being able to scan in a pipeline, shifting left, doing scans early as possible, because then you can remediate any findings as early as possible. So that's a DevOps kind of thing, right? Where you can shift that left. Hopefully that's not adding a lot of extra work to the developers. So finding the vulnerabilities, the compliance, the admission controls can also be checked early in development. If you have admission control rules protecting certain environments and checking images that they come in, that come into that environment for vulnerabilities, for compliance settings, that's also can be defined and or checked early in the development lifecycle. And now we can get me out of the way. So the security as code exports, that's referring to and related to the network and process identification, policy generation, right? So we identify the processes that are running. We identify and validate the layer 7 network protocols, the network traffic, all of the routes. We are identifying those. We build security policies from those. That's all automated. And then we can also export those behaviors in a YAML file so you can replicate that zero trust across multiple clusters. That is the key feature within NewVector that we tout as far as being able to establish zero trust, being able to get the value of identifying any differences between environments or any anomalous behavior, because you can do that in a monitor mode, which means we'll only alert. There's no performance impacts. We are just like a tap. So we're just able to identify all of this data and alert you to these differences. Okay, so now let's dive into a couple of these areas just a little bit deeper. And the first one that we're going to cover now, again, these are the supply chain side. This is going to be more of the scanning portions of what NewVector is doing. We scan in the development pipeline. So of course that's DevOps-y. Yes, we would scan via plugins, etc. Registry scanning, of course, anywhere that those development images are going to be pulled from into various environments like the integration environments, QA, UAT, etc. So when we pull those images in, we have this layer of security called admission control. Now in NewVector, if this is like pod security policies in Kubernetes, NewVector has admission control rules that are independent of those pod security policies. We'll just take a quick look at these. What makes these different is, well, we are using the Kubernetes Rancher admission controller. So we are plugged in natively to that Kubernetes, the controller. But the commands that we're using here, we've added a few of these. So the Kubernetes pod security policies, you can see these on the left-hand side here. These are the ones that are going to be deprecated. And NewVector has essentially recreated a number of those for the most popular, the best practices for like running as privilege, running as root, users, etc., privilege escalation. So we're checking for all of those. And then over here on the right-hand side, you can see where we've added all of these controls that have to do with relation to results of scanning, like for CVEs, compliance checks, checking for secrets. A new one in 5.0 is the resource limit configuration. This was from a customer wanting additional controls there. You can do namespace. And in the control itself, and if I go here to add a rule, just as a small little demo, you can also do a particular, let's just add a couple. I'll call the vulnerability Tracy. I can do complex rules. I can do things like, was the image scanned? If the image scanned is false, I don't want that image coming in. I want an image that comes from a particular registry, and I want to limit all of my images to one of registry.1.com, and that one, etc. So I can do multiple registries that way. So again, additional controls to allow you to block those images from coming in. And the most powerful, coolest thing, I think, is that you can implement this in a day, because we have a monitor mode on this too. This is the same kind of monitor mode that we use in the runtime. If we're in monitor mode, we only alert, we will not block the image, or essentially we won't tell Rancher to use the admission controller to block the image, right? We'll just say, no, we've got our information. It violates all of these things, but it will allow it to go ahead and be scheduled. The protect mode would allow you to block those. The configuration assessment that you see here, another thing that we can do early in development is checking to see whether or not a deployment would pass those admission control rules. You can just drop a YAML file, test that YAML file, and NewVector will tell you if you would have passed those admission control assessments later in the SDLC, later in the pipeline. So again, more things that we can do early to prevent issues that are going to happen later on. The other area I'm going to highlight is the runtime. So I'm going to go to groups, and let's just filter down to a particular namespace here. So again, the zero trust, we are identifying processes running on a container. You can see those processes right here. These are the rules. When we see a process, you can see the rule. And this appears that someone was doing an apt-get update and was updating. And of course, these scripting languages will run a lot of different commands, and we see all of those commands. So we build security rules for those commands. We build security rules for all of the traffic. You can see there's a lot of different traffic going to different pods from this container. We've got a user-created rule as well. So that is the zero trust. If it's a known behavior, anything outside of that behavior becomes suspect. And what we can do early in the development lifecycle is, well, let's kind of talk a little bit about that. Normally, you would pick an environment where you want to do the learning, or at least the basis or the baseline for the application behavior. Maybe it's development, maybe it's QA, maybe it's another environment that you're just doing testing in. But you learn those rules. You're probably going to add some additional rules. Maybe there's monthly system calls or reports or something that only happens infrequently. You may add some additional rules to make sure that those things are allowed as well. Not a big fear, though, when you're in monitor mode, because when you create that custom resource definition, that export, that's what we're doing right here. So let's go back to our environment here. You can see I've selected just a number of them. And when I export this group policy mode, let's say I'm going to keep it in a monitor mode, but there we go. There's the screenshot. I can put this up with the magic of video. So that's the YAML file that we're talking about. It's got all of the security settings in it. And then I can apply that YAML file to other clusters to establish the exact same zero trust. We would have the same rules, right? Because this application should behave the same no matter which cluster it's in. That's the way these rules are built. So that you can do early in the software development lifecycle. Getting back to our screen here. So when we create those rules and we export them, then we can apply those rules to other environments. And again, in the monitor mode, no risk. We're not going to block anything accidentally. You're going to get alerts for any anomalous behavior. You're able to collect all of that data. You're not impacting performance. You're not impacting any applications. You're not making anybody mad. You're just seeing what's going on so that if something were going on, anomalous behaviors at like a network egress that you weren't aware of, why is that egressing? What data is going out on that wire? So that's where you would want to do that. And eventually, through some risk assessment, you're going to reach a point where you're going to have both monitor and maybe protect mode, where you're automatically blocking for certain things. Maybe other things you have in monitor mode just to make sure you don't accidentally block something for some reason, or you're just wanting to collect data. Some environments run 100% in protect mode. Others run 100% in monitor mode, and everywhere in between. So I hope this has been a helpful, quick overview of all of the DevOps capabilities that you can see in NewVector. Again, NewVector is now open source, so it is free to use unsupported. So give it a try, see what information and value it can bring to you, and we hope to talk to you soon.